I'm a firm believer that every job you have gives you skills that you don't even know you're going to transfer to another job until you're in it. It's just always worked out that way because I've now had 4 different, very separate careers in my career lifetime. And every single time there's transferable skills you never even think about. It's really fun.
I'm Hal Marcus.
And I'm Memme Onwudiwe.
And this is Meeting of the Minds, the legal AI podcast from Evisort.
We interview lawyers, professors, and legal operations pioneers that are pushing the envelope.
Leaders using technology to drive great business outcomes and shape the future of the profession.
Hey there, Hal. Looking forward to sharing a stimulating conversation today.
Absolutely. We had a great conversation with Nancy Milinkovich, Senior Legal Operations Manager for Tricentis, which is a global leader in continuous testing and engineering for software development.
Yeah, I met Nancy years ago at a legal operations event in Dallas. I mean, the conversations we had then made me know that she'd be a great person to have on our podcast here. And I think that's evidenced with our conversation. We talked about her unique career path. We really talked about her tendency to get stuff done. She's a real practitioner and isn't afraid of going into the weeds.
Nancy had some great, really hands-on, practical advice for leveraging AI for contract use cases, for getting attorneys to use it well, and for people entering the field generally, just being bold, asking questions, taking chances. It was really a great conversation.
Well, without further ado, away we go.
Nancy Milinkovich, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great.
So we'd love to delve a little bit into the path that you followed to have the career that you have. Can you walk us through a little bit of the background of how this came about?
Yeah, sure. So I think mine is a little non-traditional in that I started off in telecom. So I started off in the late 80s, early 90s, working for a company called Bell Northern Research, which was the research division of Nortel Networks. And eventually they all merged into just Nortel. At the time, it was the largest telecommunications company in the world. And so I did internal IT, help desk support was where I started, and then eventually ended up managing a small team of engineers and computer scientists that supported ASIC chip designers for load build. And then also the captive office, which was like our testing lab for all the new, like our division was dealing with fiber optics offerings. So we ran that as well. So a lot of like desktop connectivity stuff, lots of software pushes, software upgrades. And it was really an interesting time because Nortel was at sort of the cutting edge of that kind of technology at the time. So you got to see a lot of what was cutting edge at the time. For instance, I remember like 10 meg dedicated to the desktop was a big deal. Like it was huge, right? Now we would scoff at that, right? We carry around more on our cell phones than we did back then. But anyway, it was really a cool time. So I learned a lot and then moved from Canada to the United States and ended up staying home for many years with my 2 children and wanted to get back in the workforce. So because of my tech background, I decided, okay, I'll become a paralegal. So I did my paralegal ABA certified coursework, got my paralegal cert, and then targeted doing patent prosecution work because of my tech background, which was a great fit. It really was a great fit. I was able to actually proofread and understand a lot of the documents I was reading, which is great, and learned a lot. I started off at a small boutique patent prosecution firm, and then I went to Baker McKenzie, started there as a paralegal, senior patent paralegal. And then they gave me an opportunity to create a team of patent prosecution back office support and trademark prosecution back office support out of their Belfast, Northern Ireland location. And so I grew that team from 2 people when I took it over into 12. And we were only supporting 1 or 2 offices out of our global 72 offices. And by the time I had left Baker McKenzie, we were supporting 20 plus global offices around the world for different trademark and patent prosecution projects. So that was a big achievement. And I really loved that opportunity. Also got to go to our Philippines Baker McKenzie site and work with the teams there, which was great. And from there, I went in-house into a bank, a small Texas and Colorado bank called Independent Financial. And then from there, went to in-house into Tricentis for legal operations, where I was hired to sort of start the legal operations function for them. And that's where I've been since 2022.
Was there a strong connection between your background in IP and patent prosecution with the work at Tricentis, or was that mandate very different or much broader?
Actually, it's funny in that no, I wasn't hired because of my patent prosecution background. As a lot of us know, the patenting landscape for software is pretty dismal in many countries, the US being one of them. And so, no, that wasn't the reason they hired me. But fast forward to now, I've been called in to do a lot of trademark projects and help with our trademark and IP portfolio and things like that. So I'm a firm believer that every job you have gives you skills that you don't even know you're going to transfer to another job until you're in it. It's just always worked out that way because I've now had 4 different, very separate careers in my career lifetime. And every single time there's transferable skills you never even think about. It's really fun.
Yeah. And could I ask, how did you position yourself? Because it is unique, as you said, to go from a paralegal at a law firm to someone who's building international teams. How were you able to position yourself for that job advancement, and any notes or advice to other paralegals in similar spaces?
I hate to say it, but most companies don't know what they have until you're ready to leave. So you kind of have to be ready to leave and find something else and go out there and find something else. And then you have to not be afraid to ask for it. So I was very specific in, I want this and I know I'm capable of this, and kind of throw caution to the wind. And if you fail, you fail. But if you don't, it can be a great thing. And you also have to have management that support you. I mean, I think there's 2 ways to look at it. If you go for it and you're willing to leave and you go for it and you have managers that really do see your value and a support system in the place you're working, they will want to see, can you do it? And they're willing to take that chance on you, just like you're willing to take the chance to try. But if you're in an organization that you know that that isn't there for you, then go find somewhere else where the culture is there to support you and wants to see you rise and grow. Sometimes you have to grow out instead of grow up, and that's okay. Don't be afraid of either option.
That is incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for that advice for folks. And yeah, that support system that you have at your work is really important. Would love to dive into a little bit of your work at Tricentis, because talking about support, I know that you led and kind of built their legal operations team there, and also were hired doing a mid-evaluation of CLM tools, which can also be a difficult time for a legal ops person to kind of come in and work. Could you talk a little bit about that experience and what it was like?
Yeah, so I, for the longest time, was the only legal ops member of the legal ops team. So now we have 2 other members on that team. So there's 3 of us now, but we are a small team, legal team in general. We only have 15 total members of the legal team in Tricentis. So we're just under about 1,400 employees total. So it's a pretty good ratio for a small company, but we are hyper-growth, right? Hyper-growth software company. So we know we need to expand, and we'll continue to expand the legal team in general, but continue to expand the legal ops team. But yeah, when I was hired, there already was an RFP put out there, and it had already been whittled down to 3 top contenders for bringing in a CLM. We did not have foundational technology yet in Tricentis for the legal team. So the CLM was going to be the first foundational technology we brought in. And the other 2, Evisort, thank goodness, was on that list. I was very happy to see that. I knew about Evisort through meeting yourself, Memme, at a Consero event where you were speaking, and also got to hear from some people that had implemented Evisort in their organizations. And so I was glad to see that it was shortlisted. And the other 2 on that list had no machine learning AI abilities really to speak of. What they sort of called their auto extraction capabilities are really just simply OCR. And both of the other shortlisted vendors required a very lengthy and manual, human-driven data extraction from the contracts. So basically, it was really just a smart repository, add OCR, add human beings at a high cost to then review that repository of documents, to then manually input the data fields you want to extract from the OCR and oversee that process, right? So we're still talking in both those other 2 shortlist cases, we're still talking about extremely high human touch, and in my opinion, high human error of that extraction of data into the metadata fields that you want.
So let's talk a little bit about what you were looking to achieve, though, in the organization. What were the goals of putting in place a CLM and contract intelligence around your processes?
We needed to get some logic to the chaos. So we did not have any pre-existing foundation of understanding what our contracts had in them, where our contracts all were. Something simple as just bringing all of our contracts into one space was a big deal. Knowing where they all were was a big deal. Then deciphering what we had in those contracts, how many were actually expired, we didn't need to worry about them, was a bit so just the very simple things that you would think are super simple, and they are, but if no one's ever done them before, there's still monumental shifts in the way people think, like simple naming conventions, what you can and cannot save into the repository, how you search. I think the biggest shift in usage is just, no, you don't need to use the network folder structure anymore. You have a natural language search capability, you have Boolean search capability, you have so much more at your fingertips than just simply going through a series of network folders to try to find the one folder where the document might reside. So it's just basically trying to take the chaos and turn it into some logical places where we could start gleaning some data from.
And were the contracts in shared repositories like that? Were they in different systems that the different lines of business had? So they were just kind of scattered all over.
Scattered all over. We had a main repository on SharePoint for our customer contracting agreements. Then we had another repository on a totally different platform for our vendor agreements. And then we had some other areas for like our IT contracts. So it was pretty scattered, logically scattered, but scattered. That makes sense, yeah.
It does, actually. A lot of times they're scattered in completely illogical ways, and you're just scanning hard drives to find where contracts exist. So at least they were broken down by line of business and such. What we often find is that legal gets stuck in the middle on that. They need to be able to answer questions across contracts, full stop, sell side, buy side, HR, NDAs. They need to answer questions across the gambit sometimes, and they don't have access to those different systems. Yeah. They don't have the search capability. They don't have the same extractions. They don't have the same metadata.
Well, it's interesting. Like, when you take this use case where someone says, I need to find the contracts for X customer, one of our customers. And in the old days, they would go to the repository for our customer contracts, and they would go to the network folder, the SharePoint folder for that customer name. And they would say, okay, here's the contract. Well, now I've had the case many times now where you just do a search of that customer name in Evisort, and lo and behold, oh, wow, we have not just the one contract, we have 5 contracts with 3 different entities, 2 of which we acquired, 1 of which is new. And how do all of these agreements coincide with one another? Do they collide with any of each other's? Are any of them expired? Do we need to tighten up any holes between having? So just even having everything in one place and all searchable, like the grand Oz of all contracts, even that alone has given us some really good data that we didn't have before.
Especially in today's world, we've been conditioned to be looking for AI. We're also seeing AI everywhere. You talked about how some of the tools you looked like were really just fancy OCR and glorified repositories that ultimately left a similar amount of manual work on your teams. How is that something that you can evaluate for before making a purchasing decision? How were you able to identify some of Evisort's capabilities or any AI tools capabilities when you're doing these evaluations? Because once you decide on a tool, that's a relationship that will last a few years, right?
So 2 things. I think if you're the evaluator, so if you're the one like me that was tasked with doing the RFP process, you really have to be comfortable knowing what you don't know and being honest with what you don't know, and maybe looking in your team, outside your team, maybe asking some industry experts not related to the RFP, what should I look for AI, and be honest with yourself that you don't know the answers to that. If you're in the category that you do think or believe or actually do have a good understanding of how machine learning works, that flows into artificial intelligence and how it learns on data and all those things, I think then the proof is in, can they turn it on and can it start learning your data, or can't it? right? So if something has true ML, if you are able to point it to a subset of your data, they should be able to take it out of the box, turn it on, and it should be able to start crunching away and getting some result. They're not all going to be perfect. I get it, but it should be able to do that at a bare minimum. If it cannot bring in data fields that you're expecting, if it can't learn from your data, if it needs a ton of manual effort to even secure some of the extraction that you're expecting, then that's not the tool that is correct. That's not an ML AI tool. That is an OCR tool that still will need a high degree of manual intervention to get that tool to do what you need.
What interests me is you've done a lot of time at law firms like Baker McKinsey. And I am interested in some of the AI projects that you worked on in there, but specifically because I've seen with law firms, people say, hey, we bought this AI tool, but we don't actually really use it and roll it out because people come to us because we have humans reading everything. That's kind of why they're coming to us in the first place. And so I'm curious about some of your early access to these AI capabilities in your work with Baker McKinsey and how that law firm angle maybe skewed how things are evaluated.
In any other career, you are tasked with doing a job as quickly and efficiently as possible, except when you're billing your time in a law firm, right? Mm-hmm. That was my first experience with embedded inefficiency because that was part of the job, that it was baked into how lawyers and paralegals are meant to do their job, is we're not meant to do it as quickly as possible. And no, none of us, tongue in cheek, none of us are trying to drag it out exponentially, but we all know that in order to get our billable quotas, we're not exactly working at our most efficient. If we were paid to do it quicker and you got a bonus for doing it quicker, we would do it quicker. So I think Baker McKinsey did a really good job of honing in on where AI could work, is the really high transactional places where the data sets don't change that much across the different high transactional spaces. Like, let's say, take trademark prosecution, trademark searches, for instance. You run a name through a database and across the different regions of the world to search for, can I file under this name? Can I not file under this name? Who else is filing under this name? That's a perfect opportunity for AI. It's transactional, low risk data searches, no PII. There's not going to be a lot of assumptions made on that data set. There's not going to be a lot of bias from learning that data set introduced because there's not a lot of judgment call there. It's black, white, yes, this matches, no, this doesn't. So that's where Baker McKinsey, at least when I was there, was really honing in on how can we make some of these high transactional areas of law where you don't necessarily need an attorney or a paralegal to do it. You could pass it off. And I think that's where it works really well. I think there is a danger, and we all know that the dangers are coming to the head more and more now. And we know that it's a fast evolving compliance landscape on the bias of AI and how in certain types of data sets, the biases can be introduced, and we don't want that. And obviously, so that's where having data sets that are high PII, have a human element, an emotional element, or a cultural, anthropological element, maybe now is not the best time to be using AI for those types of data sets, to make decisions based on those types of data sets. So I think that's where you really need to know what data you're mining in order to be able to understand the outcomes that might come from using AI in those data sets.
This is a theme that comes up a lot in our conversations about AI these days, because as all the focus has gone, and rightly so, toward the range of risk factors associated with generative AI and the latest incarnations of it, so often what we then find is the next step for the people evaluating that is, so what's the use case? Oh, well, this one seems pretty harmless. The implications of bias and misuse of information, IP issues, et cetera, for analyzing your own data become really quite different.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's had an impact on the attorneys that you work with in terms of their openness to AI, that what we've seen with generative AI has expanded their horizons, or has it raised the skepticism further?
I think in a way it's raised skepticism further. I think because also too, we don't like gray areas in the law. And right now, generative AI and its use on data sets and the biases and the fast developing compliance landscape surrounding that, the European decisions on how it's going to manage AI. And, it's become the new wild, wild west of who's going to win on and duke it out on how it's going to run and how it's going to be used. And I think that scares a lot of attorneys because they're naturally risk averse, right? They're supposed to be risk adverse. And this is a very risky area for most attorneys to use. And is there going to be case law eventually that if you make a decision as an attorney based on AI-driven data, can you be held accountable for the bias that was introduced in the data that you may not even have known was in it? Like there's all these, you can start right? It's like an Isaac Asimov sequel book, right? That it could...
well, it's the reasonableness standard.
Right, yeah.
I'm picturing the whole book series right now.
Right, but imagine the reasonable standard is now based on a computer-driven learning of a data set, right? What does that mean if you're making a decision as an attorney based on that data? I don't know the answers. I just think it's really interesting. My sociologist brain finds it fascinating. I think right now, co-pilots, bots and co-pilots and that can answer questions and Watson's code assistant and all of those kind of things. Okay, so as a software company, if one of our customers uses a co-pilot to answer some questions to help drive code, and that code creates an error or a doorway for a ransomware, can then, through the back door, Tricentis be held liable for the use of the co-pilot that led to the decision by the developer to use? You can start seeing this breadcrumb trail, and there's no answers to it. We don't know. So there's a lot of permutations.
Yeah, lots of litigators, lots of billable hours in the future. Anyone that thinks that AI is going to put attorneys out of work, they should just shipped over to litigation.
Shift over to AI litigation. Yeah.
There's so many cans of worms that opens up, so many layers to it. On the other hand, it's also, these are models that we've dealt with before, perhaps not on the same scale, but with other kinds of tech as they've been introduced into the industry. And there's always that need for the attorneys to be comfortable with, have enough trust in what they're relying on and weigh that accuracy, likelihood, and the potential for difficulty, that risk versus the reward that they're getting. So getting a quick answer on a contract without reading through it thoroughly, probably fine. Then again, what are you going to do with that information? What is the use case? Mm-hmm. That's a factor. And this is a tool, but you want to validate, perhaps, that answer that you're getting. This is one of the reasons we always put a link in the conversational experience to take you right to the part of the contract where the answer is coming from, so that it's a quick way to validate. Is that something you've seen in action with the attorneys in your team?
A little bit. I mean, adoption of the use of the AI in Evisort has been lower on the attorney end. I think our contract managers and myself use it more than our attorneys do yet. But again, I think some of the ways I approach training attorneys using this type of conversational AI is, what is the risk of a wrong answer? If the risk of a wrong answer is fairly low, then use it. And if risk of a wrong answer is high, still use it, but verify, right? See, it's no different than researching case law from a book. You want to find as much case law for your point, as much case law against it, and then weigh the two and see, okay, where do I think this argument will end up? It's kind of the same thing, but now instead of reading it in a book, you kind of have to approach it from the end of the answer as your starting point. So if I get an answer to this question, what was the risk of the wrong answer? What was the risk of the right answer? Is there any risks to either? So you kind of just have to learn to tweak it a little bit and how you think of it as a research tool, but it's still a research tool. As the consumer of the answer, you still need to be comfortable with the answer and have some ways of tagging it as an appropriate answer based on your expertise level with that data.
You have the unique position of implementing some of these tools before this big kind of Gen AI hype cycle that's existed. Mm-hmm. And so you first had to get teams comfortable with seeing contracts in these documents as data. And as you were talking about back in the evaluation stage, making sure they're comfortable with, hey, this is data coming from the contract. It's coming automatically. You can rely on it for this, this, and that. Can you juxtapose what that kind of learning curve has been too, insofar as kind of getting teams and legal teams to engage with contracts and data, to this next learning curve of actually conversing with and talking to your contracts and getting answers from it in this new way? Has it been similar, different? What's that been like?
I think it's a steeper learning curve this go around. Like, I remember the days of teaching attorneys Boolean searches and how to search on like relativity databases. That was a big thing when relativity came out, and attorneys were really adverse using it to go searching through a whole bunch of litigation documents to find the answers. It's kind of similar in that they still want to be told it is taking the data from the actual contracts, but it's got an extra layer of assistance in pulling more out of the contract to answer your question that maybe you wouldn't even have pulled out yourself just by doing a straight like Boolean search or just from the name of the customer and something else. When you ask it a question, it goes to a broader subsection of the data that you probably would have pulled yourself to get a more robust answer that may have some additional layers you didn't want, which is okay. You can filter those out yourself as the attorney. I think sometimes the breadth of the answers is overwhelming to some of the attorneys where they just wanted like a black and white answer. Sometimes conversational AI is more of a gray answer, which is, I think, a good thing. But if you're not expecting that broader answer, sometimes that can be a little disconcerting to the attorney learning it. And then I think the biggest thing is just how to frame the questions. Similar to Hal just mentioned, like if you're completely broad and expect it to go through the universe of all of your documents, you're probably not going to get an answer that's useful to you. And that probably wasn't your end point that you wanted. So really understanding how to frame the question to get to where you need to be, and then be comfortable with that answer based on either a brief review of where it pulled it from or going through one or two of the documents. I think the couple of attorneys that have actually done some conversational AI questions and then sort of spot checked the documents behind the answers have become more comfortable with the answers being pulled because they see it is being pulled from the pool of contracts that we have. So I think the more they use it and the more use cases they ask of it, the more the comfort level will rise with it.
You know, the natural next extension of that, in fact, this is how we often phrase it. We talk about how you can use this technology to ask anything and then track everything.
Yeah.
Because the next extension of asking the question is, okay, make a standardized data point because I want that question answered across all my contracts. And we're now getting to the point where you can have those gray answers, as you put it, turned into a structured data point that would not have been possible before. For example, rate the risk level on a 1 to 5 scale. Here are my criteria. And then the LLM will do its best to decide this one's a 3, this one's a 4, based on, it's going to be imperfect because those are judgment calls.
Yeah.
And if you phrase the question really well, you'll probably get some good results. But what we're finding is a lot of interest in creating that structured data point so that you have that quick reference guide across every contract that can be used to prioritize activity and such, even if it's imperfect. And I'm curious for your thoughts on that. Do you think that that opens up new possibilities for
Absolutely.
the attorneys?
Yeah, absolutely. I think being comfortable with the gray answers is the strength of AI. And I wish people would embrace it more. Meaning, if you can do that across all your contracts and get, I don't know, I'm going to be really conservative, 60% correct, meaning 40%, maybe they didn't get the risk rating like you mentioned, great, but 60% you did. Well, you could probably refine down the other 40% by other questions, but even having 60% of your entire body of contracts rated for certain risk criteria is way ahead of the curve of where you were the 2 seconds before you asked the question of the AI. And it would have taken you and your attorneys and contract managers months probably to pull that manually. So I think rather than seeing conversational AI as a black and white 1000% research tool, looking at it as a temperature scale and a way to get some general understanding of your bed of contract data, I think is one of the strengths of AI, but it's the one that I think is going to take a lot more time for people to be comfortable adopting in some ways. But I really think it's a strength of AI and legal data sets for sure.
If you could fill in the following blank, Nancy, and finish this sentence, which is the best way to evaluate AI in legal ops is blank.
Out of the box use case. Like you can flip it on and it works.
I love that. And obviously, that's something that we've preached in the past. Could you talk a little bit about your experience? I know it's a crazy thing that we offer here where we let people throw thousands of agreements into a platform before they kind of sign up for use to see its capability. Would you want to talk a little bit about your experience in that kind of proof of concept?
Yeah. So I think one of the big selling points, the reason I was able to sort of stand behind Evisort as my decision and kind of get it up the food chain to sign the agreement was, so as I mentioned earlier, we didn't know where all our contracts were. So one of the biggest things is just getting them all in one place and then point Evisort to it. So at the beginning, we thought maybe we had 20,000 plus documents. That was our guess. So we put them all in one spot, one SharePoint site, pointed Evisort Sandbox to it, flipped the switch, came back the next morning, and we had over, I think, 55,000 documents that had already gone through. So we thought we had 20,000. We had like 55,000. And right away, I was able to see how many, what we call master agreements were there, how many partner alliance agreements. And again, some of the data meta fields extracted, they were incorrect or whatever. But generally, we could tell we had 55,000 documents. We didn't know that before. We knew how many were in English and how many weren't in English. We didn't know that before. We knew how many sort of were kind of between our different entities. So like how many were Tricentis GmbH, how many were Tricentis Americas. We didn't know that before. And that was all just data just from the first sync. So we already had more information in one night that we had the entire time previous to Evisort of just simple data about how our contracts were striated across the globe and how many we actually had.
That's so important. I do feel like it's sometimes the data points people don't think about that can be super powerful, like how many are English, how many aren't English, how many of each document type breakdown, how many are signed and executed versus not signed and executed.
Yeah.
Are there any benefits that are overlooked to some of this basic visibility into contracts? I think folks might not even be used to when they're just signing these agreements and only tracking the things that someone might be manually tasked with tracking.
I think knowing how many aren't signed is a really key metric. And it's one of the things I use conversational AI for. So trying to figure out, I had a use case where I used conversational AI where I said, out of the list of customers, how many of their agreements are not signed? And I was able to get a number instantly. But for a company that has rapidly grown through acquisition such as ours, you're inheriting so much from those acquired companies that you weren't the one that inputted them into any system. You weren't the one that was in charge of getting them signed or naming them or whatever. So just even knowing that and cleaning those up and identifying any high risks there, if there were any, is important. And for us, knowing how many on a percentage scale that were non-English also informed some of our decisions of our new Salesforce instance, of how many of our templates in our new Salesforce instance should be translated into German and French. And some of that was based on the data I extracted from Evisort.
I'm curious, were there other uses that followed from having this information that you've seen over the last couple of years? Has it impacted how you implement your workflows, how you get new contracts evaluated and signed, or how contracts get renewed? Has it been used for strategic analysis, M&A, anything along those lines? Just curious what's come of it.
I think that we've been able to understand our workload better across all of our regional attorneys that were able to before, because of we can instantly see in our dashboard how many agreements our attorneys were assigned, how long they're taking. We didn't have any way of tracking those SLAs whatsoever prior to Evisort and dashboard and workflows. So having the ticket system through Evisort and then starting to glean that data of how long some of these reviews are truly actually taking our attorneys and why. and being able to dive into some of those agreements that took a long time and really understanding why it took a long time. And then taking that data and going, okay, is there a way to shorten that? How do we shorten it? Some of it, what we've found is just informing our sales reps on how to approach the initial negotiation with a customer can even shorten the overall review time. Because if we can train sales reps to sort of know what doors they can't open at all in a negotiation, like, no, we're not doing unlimited liability. No, we're not touching our IP rights. No, we're like, just even that sort of understanding of general understanding, even that has helped shorten some of our review times, because by the time the attorney even gets the agreement, those points were off the table. It wasn't even part of the red line because those had already been discussed. So yeah, I think we are starting to see some of those decisions and strategies being informed by Evisort, but at the very early stages, I think we've just dipped our toe in those waters. And I think only better things and more strategy and more SLAs and more understanding of our workforce and more understanding of how our attorneys are working and how sales reps are engaging with legal will come from having better, longer data sets for that.
So I'm curious for what advice you would have for somebody that's listening that's either new to legal operations or looking to make a shift in their career and trying to figure out what are the skills that you really need to be successful in this and what are the opportunities that they would see there?
I think I might have a unique perspective on it. Not a popular, maybe. I'm kind of known as the queen of hopping careers because I've managed to go from several very disparate careers. And what I am a strong proponent of is your skill set from one career to another is more important than even employers understand. So we're so focused on what a person's degree is, or do they have direct experience with this platform, or do they have direct experience with B2B sales? And I get it, but all of those skill sets, platforms, those can be taught, but the ability of a person to process information, to think on their feet, to pivot fast, to be open to new, to be open to gray, to be curious, to learn quick. Those are things that you can see on a resume by the fact that a person can go from career to career or can create new paths for themselves or maybe bring a degree that you didn't think was directly relatable. For instance, I started my career in telecom. My undergraduate's in sociology. So I self-taught myself all of the Linux, all of the coding, all of software development, all of the routing. I learned Perl myself. I did all that on my own. So I didn't need the degree to be able to be good at that job. What I needed was someone to be like, yeah, try it, see if you can do it. So I think two things. As an employee, be open to self-learning and self-motivation and take on things that interest you, but don't let your lack of specific skill sets prevent you from applying for a job that you know you'd be good at. And I think for employers, it's be open to things that aren't directly related to the job description. Because again, most of the job descriptions you see, a lot of that can be taught, but what can't be taught is the person's ability to learn and fit into your corporate culture. So those are the biggest things I look at.
All right. I feel compelled to read from an AI-generated definition of sociology. Part of it, it says, sociologists investigate the structure of groups, organizations, and societies, and how people interact within these contexts. Pretty much applicable to anything in any corporate or a law firm experience. It's how you work with people, right?
Yeah.
Right at the core of it.
Yeah.
I think that should be the required degree for everyone that goes into this.
Yeah.
Anyone that has to interact with attorneys on any level should have to be a sociologist.
Yeah. Yeah. Because Unix was easy. Understanding people was harder. Learning Unix and Linux was easy compared to, especially in our multinational, multi-global companies we all work in, like really understanding, like I can't tell you how many times understanding different cultures has helped me be a liaison between like attorneys in Europe and attorneys in the US, even attorneys in Canada to the US. Like it's amazing to me how just being able to bridge some of those cultural differences can really help.
Is there something that you would have as advice for your younger self at an earlier stage of this part of your career? Something that you wished you knew sooner?
I think early on, in my career, I always felt a little inferior because I didn't have the law degree. And in some ways, it has been difficult in certain scenarios to get promotions in legal ops without a law degree to the level that I feel sometimes that I was operating at. But I think at the end of the day, I think it would be, you're not inferior, you just see the world differently, and that's a good thing. So sometimes I think when you're younger and a younger employee, when you're sitting in a meeting and you're not quite understanding what everyone around you is saying, or it doesn't ring true for you, when you're younger, you'll be like, okay, well, I'm stupid. Why can't I figure this out? Now I'm more like, do any of these people actually really know what they're talking about? And if they do, I need to put my hand up and ask them to explain it to me. So not being afraid to appear stupid because you don't know everything is a really valuable thing you should learn early, because I've had it happen just a few times where there's acronyms flying around and people are talking and I'm sitting there going, I really don't understand a word these people are saying and it really is not making sense to me. And also I'll put my hand up and be like, hey, what does that acronym mean? What's the objective? Like, how does this play out? What's the end game? And come to find out, like, two of the people spewing the acronyms didn't know what the acronyms meant themselves. And again, I'm not saying you have to be horrible about it, but instead of seeing yourself as deficient, just realizing that sometimes the people you're in the meeting with also don't know, and they're not brave enough to raise their hand and ask some of the questions. And it actually, I think it makes you look more intelligent when you can make yourself a little vulnerable and be like, I really want to understand this. Can you explain this to me so I really understand it? And that is a skill I wish I had learned earlier.
Nancy Milinkovich, thanks so much for talking to us today.
Thank you so much, guys. It was great to see you guys.
Meeting of the Minds, the Legal AI podcast, is brought to you by Eversort. To learn more about Eversort and how we can help you contract better with AI, visit Eversort, EVISORT.com.
You can find Meeting of the Minds on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to click subscribe so you won't miss future episodes.
On behalf of everyone here at Eversort, thanks for tuning in.